Hello, everyone, and welcome to session 4 of the massively open online course for the University of Nicosia's master's degree in digital currencies. I'm Andreas Antonopoulos, and I'll be answering questions from our students during the past week of studies. If you have any questions, don't forget, use the question and answer tool in YouTube in order to ask your additional questions, and I'll try to answer them live. As always, try to give us prepared questions so we have a nice set to go with each time. Nana asks, hi all, I came across an article today with a link heading Hacking Cryptography in the Countdown to Quantum Computing. Wondering if quantum computing poses a challenge to the current concept of encryption and private keys remaining private in Bitcoin. Yes, quantum computing can challenge certain types of encryption, especially those that involve prime factorization. And Bitcoin uses, at its core, a system of elliptic curve encryption, or more specifically, elliptic curve digital signatures that are vulnerable to quantum computing. In fact, we have seen that quantum computing systems can accelerate the factorization of elliptic curves. However, there is a very interesting design feature within Bitcoin that makes it possible not only to have the system be resistant to quantum computing attacks, but also gives us a very useful avenue for upgrading the encryption and digital signature algorithm that's used within Bitcoin for future proofing. Now, one thing you have to understand is that encryption always has an expiration date. Every algorithm used in cryptography is assumed to have a shelf life of 1, 2, maybe 3 decades at most, after which the advances in computing, the advances in new algorithms, weaknesses that are discovered, and other things make the use of that cryptographic algorithm unsuitable. So really, it's a matter of at what point does it become commercially viable to break the system of cryptography at a cost that is less than the secrets being protected by that system of cryptography. So every system of cryptography is a continuous improvement project. It requires updates. It requires change in order to keep up in what is essentially an arms race. Now, in Bitcoin, one of the interesting features is that the public keys that are used for the elliptic curve digital signature algorithm are not actually put into the blockchain. Instead, what is presented in the blockchain when you receive money is not your public key, but a Bitcoin address. And this address is a double hash of the public key. This isn't an accident. One of the interesting things that happens in Bitcoin is that the types of weaknesses that are found in elliptic curve digital signatures are not found in hashing algorithms, and vice versa. Those two systems of cryptography, the hashing algorithm and the elliptic curve digital signature, are completely different classes of algorithms. And so by not exposing the public keys and instead using a Bitcoin address, which is a double hash of the public key, even if it is possible to reverse the elliptic curve digital signature from a public key and derive the private key through some advancement in technology, a weakness in the algorithm, quantum computing, or whatever, you don't actually see the public keys. So you can't actually derive the private keys. The only time you see the actual public key is when a transaction is spent. So when an amount that is locked to an address gets spent, the signature that is applied contains the public key. Now, if you use Bitcoin properly, then you follow the most important rule, which is that every transaction uses one address and one address only, and that address is only used once. If you only ever use an address once, then as that address is used and has value in it, the public key is not visible. The moment the public key is visible, that is the moment that address has already been spent. And as a result, now contains no value. And if you never reuse that address, the fact that the public key is exposed means that even if that could be reversed, you won't suffer a loss. So quantum computing actually is not a big problem for Bitcoin, and in any case is probably several years, decades perhaps out before it's commercially available to the point where anyone would use it to attack the Bitcoin system. But in the meantime, we actually can make upgrades to the cryptography systems that reside in Bitcoin. Already, with the introduction of segregated witness, there is a path for doing soft upgrades that can introduce new features, such as Schnorr signatures, which are a different class of digital signature algorithm, that would offer a completely different set of challenges, even for quantum computers. So as you can see, we do have options within Bitcoin, and that's due to some very carefully made choices that seem strange at first. Why would you put a hash instead of the public key? And now appear prescient if you look at them in a bit more detail. Jesse says, in the previous video session, we were asked to look for transactions on the blockchain with lots of inputs and outputs. But during that process, I found a block with what looks to have 0 transactions. When I look at it further, it looks like the previous transaction was 2 seconds before. Would this be a case where no transactions were in the memory pool, and as a result, there were no transactions to be included? How often does a block with 0 transactions happen? It happens somewhat often, indeed, Jesse. So the reason you see a block with 0 transactions is not really about the fact that the memory pool is empty. Usually, the memory pool is not empty. However, what an empty block represents is part of the race that is occurring in the competition between miners. Let's look at a specific scenario that creates an empty block. Let's say you're a miner, and you are trying to find a solution to a candidate block that you've constructed. Now, you receive a message on the network that tells you that a new block has been discovered. So at that point, you have to restart your computation with a new candidate block. But the moment you receive the message that a new block has been found, a new solution to a block has been found, and the blockchain has been extended by 1 block, you don't actually know what transactions are in that block. In order to find out what transactions are in the block, you have to download all of the transactions. You have to use the transaction ID for every transaction to retrieve these transactions and compare them to what you have in the mempool. You then have to discard what's in the mempool. So first, you have to download the whole block. And that may be a megabyte, which takes a few seconds. You also have to then go through and find all of the transactions in the mempool, remove the ones that have been included in the most recent block, and discard them, because now they've already been mined. And then you would construct a candidate block from what's left in the mempool. Here's the problem, though. This takes time. It may take 30 seconds. It may take a minute. Depending on how fast the transactions have propagated, maybe the block included a transaction that was seen that you have not seen yet, and you need to retrieve it. So as a miner, your system is basically now doing this 30-second, maybe 45-second, maybe 1 minute inventory, where it has to find all of the transactions that are in that block. Now, during that time, you don't have a good pool of transactions to put in a candidate block. If you simply take what's in the mempool, you run the risk of including a transaction that has already been mined, and that would make your candidate block invalid. And then you'd have to start all over again, wasting precious resources. So what miners often do is, when they see indication that there is a new block that's being discovered, but they don't know exactly which transactions are in it, so they don't have some of those transactions, what they'll do is they'll start with a candidate block that is empty. That guarantees that it's valid. It just has one transaction, the Coinbase transaction for reward. And then for the 30 seconds, 1 minute, or however long it takes them to fully validate the recently announced block, to check off the mempool, to discard all of the transactions, to do the cleanup they need to do. During that time, they have the opportunity to still keep doing mining that allows them to use the energy. They can't turn off the mining. They can't simply stop mining for that time. The mining equipment is going to still consume electricity even if you don't give it work. So they have to give it something to do while they're waiting. And what they do is they mine an empty block. Now, as they're mining this empty block, maybe they validate the parent block. They've confirmed all of the transactions in it. They've got copies of those transactions. They've cleaned up the mempool. Now they're ready to create a candidate block that has transaction in, so they can make even more revenue. Well, they don't have to stop mining. What they simply do is they construct the candidate block with transactions in it, which they validated and are sure is correct. And then they simply switch to mining this candidate block for the rest of the time and continue with the competition. The bottom line is, if you have this equipment running, there is no downtime. There is no time that you want to waste not using the electricity to mine a block productively, because there is a good chance that in the 30 seconds or so that you're trying to validate this block, you might actually find a solution. And if you do find a solution, you win. And then you just move on to doing another block. And really, you haven't wasted anything, because it just means that you found one block early, and you have just as much chance of finding another block in the remaining time that's left. All right, sorry there, just have to switch my screens again. Great. Frederick asks, in what kind of use cases are HD wallets better suited? Frederick, that's a great question. I would say at this point, there are no use cases in which anything other than an HD wallet would be better. I think HD wallets are kind of the industry best standard. The alternative to deterministic wallets, or hierarchical deterministics, which is what the HD means, are wallets that are non-deterministic. That means that there's no relationship to all of the keys that are in the wallet and all of the addresses. Each one is picked at random. And as a result, you have to back all of them up. So before we had deterministic wallets, we had a model whereby if you wanted to have privacy, if you wanted to have reusability, if you didn't want to have reusability of addresses, you wanted each transaction to have a unique key and a unique address. That means with each transaction, you have to generate a new key. It's generated at random. It has no relationship to any of the other keys that you have in your wallet. And that means that every time you generate a key in a transaction, you have to make a backup of your wallet. That makes it very difficult to make a resilient system that you can back up and recover. HD wallets allow you to generate 2 billion keys per tree, pretty much unlimited number of keys, all derived from a single seed. So as long as you have a backup of that single seed, your entire set of transactions and addresses that you've generated are always available. It also allows you to do very useful things with organization. That's the hierarchical part. It allows you to create accounts and sub-accounts. It allows you to handle multiple different coins off the same seed. So you could have a wallet that on branch 44 handles Bitcoin, on branch 60 handles Ethereum, on branch 48 handles multi-sig transactions. It can have Litecoin and test Bitcoins and all kinds of other cryptocurrencies, all derived off the same seed. So it becomes a multi-currency wallet. So multi-currency, multi-account, flexible, unique address per transaction, all connected back to a single seed that you can back up. And usually for backup, we use the mnemonic phrase system, where you where the system creates 12 or 24 English words for you, and you write those down, and that's your backup. So hierarchical deterministic wallets are the best system we have right now. They're much superior than the alternatives we have. They have become an almost ubiquitous industry standard. And I believe they should be preferred over any other mechanism we have at the moment. Okay. Nut asks, I set up a wallet on blockchain info about 2 years ago, and the app now calls my original address an imported address and wants me to transfer my funds into what they call my Bitcoin wallet. Why? What does this do? And what are the pros and cons of switching addresses like this? Perfect question, Nut. Not only is that a great question, but it ties exactly into the previous question we answered, which is that as far as I know, I could be wrong, so I'm not speaking for blockchain info, but this is my understanding. At some point last year, blockchain info created a fully HD wallet system. Prior to that, your blockchain info wallet was a collection of randomly generated, non-deterministic, unrelated keys, or what we call just a bunch of keys wallet, which is all bundled together. That makes it difficult to back up. It means you have to do continuous backups every time you create a new address. You have to make a new backup. I believe that now the new wallet is a hierarchical deterministic wallet, which means that all of the keys are generated and derived from a single seed. So in order to help you migrate from the old system to the new system, your old addresses, whichever ones had balance, are called imported addresses because they're basically individual, standalone, separate addresses. They're all independent. They're not related to each other. And they want you to transfer this into what they call My Bitcoin Wallet, which presumably is a system that generates a series of keys and addresses from a single derived seed. This will make things easier to back up, much more reliable, much more resilient. And it may have other features like the ability to have sub-accounts and to comfortably generate a new key and a new address for every transaction without having to do a new backup. So those are the pros. The cons, well, as long as you pay the right amount of fee in order to sweep your funds from the old addresses to the new addresses, really not too many cons. You want to make sure you pay a fee, and unfortunately, you're going to have to pay a fee. Your wallet should handle that, and a few hours after you do it, you're going to have all of your funds cleared into your new wallet. Jerome asks, when trading crypto, it is vital to be able to react to price changes. If I keep an exchange in control of my coins, I can instantly access them if they don't default. For security reasons, I would like to keep control of my own private keys. However, this introduces transaction lag. What solutions are available to strike a balance between security and instant access? Jerome, at the moment, there are no solutions that allow you to do that. So you are making an explicit trade-off. You are increasing your security risks by giving custodial control to someone else, in this case, the exchange, in order to reduce the latency of transactions and be able to trade rapidly in crypto. And you should be aware of that. And if you're aware of that and you understand the risk that at some point all of that cryptocurrency could disappear, that's fine. If it's worth doing to you. That's a risk analysis you have to do. I think in the future, we're going to see some better systems. One of the ones that is most promising in my mind is the use of bidirectional payment channels, also known as Lightning Network, which is a routed system of bidirectional payment channels. But you could just use plain bidirectional payment channels, whereby all of the participants in the exchange have essentially what is a hub and spoke relationship, with the hub being the exchange and payment channels spokes to each of the individuals. That way you control the keys that control one end of that payment channel. That would allow you to do some very interesting models that allow you very low latency for trading between participants of the exchange, while at the same time keeping control of the wallets of the funds under your keys. Now, that's just speculation. I don't know how this would work, but I've certainly heard this kind of architecture being discussed, and I think it's a rather promising option. For now, you have to take that risk. Wim de Groot asks, what would a payment in a store look like if you're using a Ledger Nano? Would there be a slot in the cashier's desk to insert the key? Would the shopper get a smartphone and use that for authentication, and then use the secret key? It seems to me the Ledger is designed primarily to be used on the desktop. Is that correct? Wim, we're not going to see these devices used directly to plug into a retailer's system. They're not designed to do that. And part of the reason for that, we'll see in the next one, is in the next question, is that the APIs and the serialization protocol that's used to communicate between a desktop application or a mobile application and a hardware wallet, these are still proprietary. I should say probably not proprietary. They're actually open source, but I should say they're distinct. They're non-standard. So the Ledger uses one protocol to communicate with the desktop app. The Trezor uses a different protocol. We will see these likely become standardized over time as things settle down, but it's still early days. And so at the moment, every company is pursuing different avenues and doing things in different ways, trying to maximize the innovation. So you wouldn't be able to really just plug in a hardware wallet into a retail store. On the other hand, however, all, if not most, if not all of these hardware wallets can work, especially on Android devices, with a cable that allows you to connect a USB device to your smartphone. So essentially, you pull out your smartphone, you plug in your hardware wallet, you authorize the transaction on your smartphone, you confirm it on the hardware wallet, you unplug it, and then you've done your retail transaction. So that's one example of how you would use it in a retail environment. Honestly, at the moment, these things do not work as smoothly as you might like. So I think what most users do is they have essentially two wallets. They have a cold wallet, which they use a hardware device for, which keeps the majority of their funds. And then they have a petty cash wallet, just like having a bank account and then having money in your pocket. So I carry, less than a Bitcoin for sure, usually a lot less than a Bitcoin, maybe a third of a Bitcoin at most on my smartphone. And that allows me to buy a cup of coffee, like I've been doing the last few days here at a cafe that accepts Bitcoin. Or to demonstrate someone how Bitcoin works, I'll give them a tiny amount in Bitcoin so they can try it out. So I do carry what I would call petty cash on my smartphone wallet. And that doesn't, it requires a PIN, but it's not an offline hardware wallet. And I'm taking some risk there. If my smartphone is hacked and the wallet software isn't written well, or something else, then I may lose that amount of money. But it's a risk I'm willing to take. I've got a PIN protection on it. The smartphone application is well designed and has been out for a few years, so I trust it. I feel comfortable with that risk. I would not feel comfortable keeping the larger amount that I might have on a hardware wallet. So nobody should feel comfortable keeping a large amount on an online wallet. But that's how you kind of arrange the balance between petty cash spending and long-term storage. Vim asks a follow-up question. I see Bitcoin has Faucet. Does it also have a test network with test Bitcoins? Test networks can be nice to experiment and learn while reducing risk. Vim, yes. In fact, Bitcoin has several test networks. There's testnet, which is the fourth iteration now of a comprehensive test network that has all of the same features that are available in the main network of Bitcoin. So it's a parallel blockchain with its own test Bitcoins, and you can get test Bitcoins from Faucets, which has all of the features activated that are activated on the main chain. There are also several special purpose test networks for specific features. For example, segregated witness has its own test blockchain. In fact, it has 4 versions of it. We're at the 4th version at the moment, called SegNet 4. And SegNet 4 is a testnet for SegWit. And that's where all of the SegWit features are activated so that people can test them out. Also, the Bitcoin Core software allows you to easily create a local copy of a test chain that you use only for internal testing that is not public, like testnet. So there's a public testnet that everyone can join and participate and mine, etc. And you can also create private testnets. And you can create something else called a regression testing testnet, or regtest. If you put Bitcoin Core into regtest mode, you can generate a completely closed chain that is local only. And you can mine it at any difficulty you want. You can generate blocks with any parameters that you want. And you can test different aspects of the blockchain. So where testnet, the public testnet, is used to test applications that expect features that are the same to the Bitcoin mainnet, SegNet is used to test applications that are trying to test more advanced SegWit features that are not yet available on mainnet. And finally, regtest allows you to test features on the blockchain itself that don't exist. So you can basically make a tailor-made Bitcoin blockchain that behaves any way you like using that. All right, our next question comes from Vim. Private keys as verification of identity. What is your opinion on using private keys as proof of digital identity? This is to eliminate passwords. And wouldn't a device like a hardware wallet also require a password or PIN code? So are you just substituting one password for another? And is it more likely that biometric recognition will prevail? So let's start with the first one. I think that using private keys, or more specifically, using hierarchical deterministic wallets to generate passwords for different sites. So you can generate unique passwords for a site, but they're all related back to the original seed, the one you have a backup for, that is the same one that generates the tree that contains your money, is a great way to run a password manager. In fact, several of the hardware wallets are now developing various types of password manager software that allow you to generate unique passwords for different sites, but also have all of them backed up to your primary seed. Yes, and if you have that, hardware wallet also requires its own password or PIN code. But the difference is that in one case, you're transmitting that password, perhaps over a secure channel like HTTPS, so that's OK, but it's still online. Whereas the password that you type in, or PIN code you type in to your hardware wallet, is not transmitted. In fact, it's not even seen by the desktop computer. So even if your laptop or desktop or smartphone is compromised, it just presents perhaps a grid for the PIN code, and you tell it the location where the PIN numbers are, but the desktop has no idea what the PIN grid looks like, because you can only see that on the screen of your hardware wallet. So for example, your hardware wallet may show a screen which has 6, 1, 3, 2, 5, 8, 4, 9, 1. And so the numbers 1 through 9, but scrambled. So if your password is 6644, you do the upper left button, and then you do the middle row rightmost button twice, and you've entered the PIN. But when you do that on your laptop or desktop, the laptop or desktop has no idea what the PIN is. All it knows is that you said, upper left twice, then middle row rightmost character twice. And the next time you enter the PIN, they're going to be in different locations. So that's really the advantage. So using hardware really protects both the passwords themselves that get transmitted, but also the PIN for the device. Is it more likely that biometric recognition will prevail? Honestly, I am very suspicious of biometric recognition. Biometric recognition or biometric systems are extremely useful as a second factor to an authentication mechanism. They're not useful as the primary factor or only factor in authentication systems. And the reason is that they are highly susceptible to coercion or theft. And if they are coerced or theft, there's no way you can change them. If I set my devices to unlock with my finger, and you grab my finger and mash it onto my device, even though I don't want you to open it, you've opened my device, if that's the only factor that's required. If I pick up a glass and have a drink, and then I put it down on the bar, and you take that glass away, a bit of super glue, some latex, boom, you have my fingerprint. You can apply that directly to my phone that you've stolen, and you've got access to my device. So it's very easy to steal a fingerprint from someone. And it also means that if something happens to me, if I'm unconscious or whatever, someone can simply pick up my finger and touch it to my phone and unlock it. So that's really useful if it's a second factor. So if I have to enter a PIN that I remember and use my fingerprint, that's great, because that gives me two ways of controlling access. So if you happen to grab my PIN with a camera and steal my phone, you still can't open it because it requires a fingerprint. You have to think of authentication in terms of multiple factors. John asks, actually, hang on a second. Before I go to the next question, just a brief pause. Let's have a look at the follow-up questions. We've got two follow-up questions that I think are closely related to this. The first one is Jan. Jan says, hello, I'm a bit confused. What exactly is the private key for me as a Bitcoin user to store in a hardware wallet which I ordered, perhaps a ledger? So Jan, great question. There is no private key at first. When you order one of these devices, they're in an uninitialized state, meaning they don't have any keys on them. The first time you run these devices, or if you wipe them and restart them and reset them back to their uninitialized stage, the first time you run them, they will generate a key. And the way they do that is that each one of these hardware wallets has on board a hardware-based random number generator. And this hardware-based random number generator, sometimes it uses white noise, overwhelming an amplifier or a diode, and essentially generating a signal that is more noise than signal, and thus random. Usually that signal that is random is then passed through some algorithms to clean it up. Very frequently, that's the SHA algorithm. So by passing it through a hashing algorithm that will clean up the signal, make it spread uniformly across the entire range of randomness of SHA. You take some random noise from a transistor, you feed it through SHA, you get some random numbers out of that, and then you use those to construct a new key. That key never leaves the device. It may display on the screen a series of words for you to write down, and these would be your mnemonic, and that's it. The key then remains on the device, or the seed remains on the device, and subsequently keys are generated for every transaction you want. So you don't have to figure out a private key. You don't have to guess. You can choose a PIN number to protect it, but the keys are generated by the device. And that's a good thing, because most users are not really good at generating. Most humans are not good at generating random numbers. In fact, it's pretty much impossible as a human being to generate serious random numbers. So the device does it for you. That's one of the really good things the device does for you. Software randomness is not very reliable. The best way to get random numbers is using a hardware device. And Trappier asks, is there any thought or proposals in the Bitcoin community to using a scheme like Touch ID as a way to authenticate the owner of Bitcoin instead of passcodes? Yes, again, back to my previous comment, you could use biometrics, but you should not use biometrics as the sole identifying passcode. You certainly shouldn't use it to generate keys. And the reason for that is because if your biometric is compromised, which is actually very easy to do, then you can't change fingers. Then you're stuck. I mean, you could change to using a different finger, but you only have 10. That's not a very good plan for life. So what you want to do is locally authenticate with your fingerprint as a second factor for authentication. And in fact, there are a number of applications that do that. If you run a Bitcoin wallet on a modern iPhone that has Touch ID, you can tell it to ask for a PIN code and a fingerprint in order to authenticate the user. I don't have my phone here, but I have a Nexus. It has a fingerprint sensor on the back, and I can use that as a second factor together with a PIN on my Bitcoin wallet. So that's something you might consider. All right, back to the questions from the forums. John asks, how do you get as secure as possible? Do you buy a brand new netbook, install Tails on it? Tails is a secure, privacy-focused Linux distribution. Do you install Armory and generate an offline wallet ID and print it out and multi-sig paper backups and then send it to multiple safe locations? Never use that computer to go online. Can you go even more paranoid and secure? John, sure, you could do all of these things. My guess is that for the vast majority of people who do all of these things, they will end up losing their money. And the reason they'll lose their money is not because there isn't enough security in the scheme, but because it's too complex. And something will go wrong in all of this. In fact, I think a much better approach is to use a hardware wallet. The whole point of a hardware wallet is to reduce the complexity so you can apply security at a level that protects your funds, but without making the solution so complex that you forget an important component or lose an important component, or the software changes in a way that you don't understand, and then you lose access to your funds and need either a lot of help or can't be helped by anyone. In fact, I've seen more examples where people tried to build these elaborate security solutions, and the end result was they lose their money rather than have it stolen from them because what they built is too complex. One of the challenges of taking all of your money, putting it in a barrel and burying it in the desert, and then making a treasure map with a complex quiz to figure out where it is that it's more likely you'll forget where the barrel is and never be able to dig it up again. The same thing applies to Bitcoin wallets. So how do you do it? I would recommend using as much as possible industry standard practices, industry standard protocols, industry standard wallets. In my opinion, the best way to do this is to use a hardware wallet that uses the BIP39 mnemonic phrase system for backups, gives you 12 to 24 English words, uses a BIP44, BIP32 hierarchical deterministic wallet with a broadly recognized structure that can be imported into any other wallet that's compatible quite comfortably, so you're not dependent on any specific implementation. And then initialize that wallet. You don't need a brand new netbook. You can do this relatively secure on a used netbook. Even if the netbook or smartphone is compromised, if your hardware wallet displays your mnemonic phrase on its screen, then there's nothing for the netbook to capture. I would recommend you hide all. You remove any device that has a camera or microphone from the room. You do this the first time when you're generating the keys. Cover the lenses of any cameras, and don't say the words out loud. But other than that, you can basically take your hardware wallet, initialize it, write down the 12 or 24 words. I take the piece of paper where I write down the 12 or 24 words, and I laminate it. And the reason I laminate it is because one of the major risks for paper is water. And you don't want water destroying your paper backup. You can make multiple copies of that paper. laminate them, put them in a safe that is fireproof, and that gives you a very high level of security. And then after that, you can use your hardware wallet to do transactions. That's much more foolproof. It's based on standard practices. If the wallet manufacturer or the software you are using goes out of business, you can always take that mnemonic phrase, which is based on an industry standard, and you can import it into pretty much any other wallet. So can you go even more paranoid and secure? Sure you can, but you're probably going to lose your money. Rudolph asks, I think I've already answered this, but I'll just quickly answer it again. Rudolph asks, a hardware wallet is storage for my keys, and they should never leave the hardware device. How do Bitcoin software clients interact with these devices to get the transaction signed? Is it some kind of specified interface? And do Bitcoin clients support different hardware tokens? As I said before, every hardware wallet uses a different interface. It's not standardized. However, many Bitcoin wallets actually support 2 or 3 different types of hardware wallets. So start with one of your preferred software wallets, one you really like, and see if that can help you. So for example, when it comes to multisig, one of my favorite software wallets is Copay. Copay supports Ledger and Trezor hardware wallets in order to do multi-signature signing with a hardware wallet, which is a very powerful combination. I also like Mycelium on Android that also supports Ledger and Trezor. Most of these also support KeepKey because it uses the same protocol as Trezor. So there's a lot of options out there. You're not really limiting your choices. I think over time we're going to see some standardization. Ahmed asks, on slide 29, it says, when using web clients that generate keys for you, it is most advisable to save that page and generate the private keys offline. My question is, how do you generate private keys offline? So this applies to web pages that contain JavaScript that does the key generation in your browser. A common system for that is bitaddress.org, but you can also generate a BIP39 mnemonic phrase and seed using a JavaScript generator. Make sure first you are at the right page and verify the fingerprint to make sure it hasn't been modified by some man-in-the-middle attack. Once you have, you can store that page as an HTML page on your local drive. You can then go offline. What does that mean? Turn off Bluetooth, turn off Wi-Fi, disconnect from the internet. If you're really paranoid, unplug your router. And then open that page while your system is completely offline. Run the JavaScript and HTML that's in that page in your browser. Start with a clean copy of your browser, or maybe a new browser. And then generate the keys. Write down whatever you need to write down for the seed or the key. Close everything down. Wipe the cache. Go back online. This is not easy, right? So if you look at all of that, it's a pretty complex exercise. So again, if you feel confident you can pull off this procedure with a high level of security without missing any of the steps and messing it up, do it. If not, that's what a hardware wallet is for, so you don't have to do these complex things. It makes security a lot easier. So for users who are not security experts, who are not systems experts, I would recommend you spend the extra funds to get a hardware wallet so you don't have to deal with this complexity. All right, OBC asks, basics of cryptocurrency, slide 40 says the creation of new blocks must take an average of 10 minutes. The 3 adjacent blocks listed below are less than 10 minutes apart in total. And he has 3 block numbers, 431098, 431099, and 431100. Why is this? How exactly is the 10-minute rule enforced? All right, OBC. So the most important word in the sentence, creation of new blocks must take on average 10 minutes. And this is an average that is calculated over a 2-week period. In a 2-week period, you have 2016 blocks. So on average, you'll have 10-minute enforcement of the block timing. And that's done by increasing or decreasing the difficulty if the average time is running fast or slow. But that doesn't mean that you can't have blocks coming 30 seconds apart, sometimes more than one, as long as, on average, you have 10 minutes. So you might see blocks that are 30 seconds apart. Sometimes we get blocks that are 40 minutes apart, so they're way too late. And it's simply a matter of odds. In order to generate these blocks, there is a 1 in 2 exahash per second chance of finding a solution to the block problem. An exahash is a very big number. The probability, therefore, maybe the first hash you try is a solution. Or maybe you need to do another exahash or 5 exahashes before you find one. Probabilities work that way. So what are the chances that the next 3 coins you flip a coin toss are going to be heads? Try it. You'll see that very often you'll flip a coin and will come up heads 3 times in a row. Now, the average should be that it only comes up heads half the time. And yet, here you have 3 coin tosses in a row that are heads. What does that mean? It means nothing. It means keep tossing, and you'll see the average revert to the mean over time. The follow-up to that is, after the 2016 difficulty retargeting, at block number 431424, I notice the difficulty increases, but the time interval for the next 3 blocks is not exactly 10. It's 7 and 2 minutes, respectively. Why is this? Again, even right after the difficulty retarget, you should expect a slight increase in the amount of time it takes to have subsequent blocks, because the difficulty went up. So it's harder to find blocks. So it should revert closer to the 10 minutes. But again, that doesn't mean you can't have a 7 and a 2 minute block. If you want to look at the average, here's an exercise for you. You could try it out. Write a script that collects the 2016 blocks, perhaps any 2016 blocks, and plots the average time on a graph for any set of 2016 blocks, and see what numbers you get. You'll be surprised. John asks, if I'm understanding correctly, rewriting anything on the blockchain is computationally impossible, as it will create a fork that is always behind. Not impossible. It's computationally quite possible. It's computationally expensive, and more expensive the further back you go. So that's a really important point to notice. There is absolutely nothing in the protocol that stops you from going to block 2 and saying, I'm going to recalculate all 413,000 blocks from this point on. You can. The protocol will allow you to do it. You just have to outspend, in terms of energy and computation, everybody else in the world while they're still trying. Theoretically, it's possible. Practically, it's not. And that's the difference. John says, but let's say the miner that wins the block puts a fraudulent transaction in the chain that gets accepted. Is that possible? No, it's not. And the reason is that every other miner and every other full node and every other node that's doing validation will validate not just the block, not just the headers, not just the proof of work, but every single transaction in the block. The rule is, a block is valid if the block itself is valid and every transaction in that block is in itself valid, and every part of every transaction is in itself valid. So validity of a block means that every transaction is valid, every part of every transaction is valid, the block as a whole is valid, the headers are valid, the Coinbase transaction is valid, the timing is valid, the size is valid, the amounts are valid, the Merkle roots are valid, the proof of work is valid, everything gets validated, especially when you've just seen a new block and you're trying to decide whether to add it to the blockchain. Now, if you're looking at catching up to the chain and you're several 100,000 blocks back and you know that other people checked and mined this, your client may take some shortcuts. It may say, I'm not going to validate signatures for the first 300,000 blocks because I'm pretty sure that by this point, since everybody else has already done this validation, they're okay. But certainly, you don't take that shortcut for new blocks just created. Usually, most clients will validate thoroughly the last 100 blocks, and they'll validate all of the headers and the Merkle trees on all of the blocks before that. And they'll do complete and total validation. If you're a miner, validation of the blocks you receive is just as important as validation of the blocks you create. And we've seen examples where miners failed to do validation. This is called SPV mining or light mining, where basically they mine blindly. If they see someone claim they have a valid block, they accept it and try to mine on top of it. In the past, when miners have done that, they've lost money because they've created valid blocks on top of what subsequently was shown to be invalid blocks, and then the entire chain gets rejected, and they've just wasted a whole lot of energy. All right. Those are all the questions we have for this session. Thank you very much for watching session 4 of the Massively Open online course for the University of Nicosia and the master's degree in digital currencies. I'm your host, Andreas Antonopoulos. It's been a pleasure answering your questions. Please try out some of the things I proposed as little exercises. Write some more questions for next time. Participate in the forums so you can help your fellow students or learn from each other. And I will see you again in just a few days for session 5. Thank you.